Greetings all. Welcome to Aquarian Diary. I'm your host, John Irving. It is August 3rd, 2024. The title of this episode is Why Do Dictators and Tyrants Exist? If you're like me, and there may not actually be very many people like me, but if you're like me, you wonder about these things. How is this even possible? What purpose could it possibly serve? Who on earth would benefit from such things? From my perspective, it's clearly irrational and illogical. So therefore, the short answer is that people are stupid, or at the very least, they do stupid things. In my view, if someone was trying to be a dictator or tyrannical, you just get rid of them. You either throw them in prison, or forcibly remove them, or literally just get rid of them. Such characters are, in fact, no better than mob bosses, except for whatever reason, they seem to be given greater latitude to be criminal. They commit crimes on a level that affects entire societies or countries. And businesses and companies and other nations will still conduct various forms of trade or relations or strategic relations or affairs with these criminals, even though at home they will imprison people who engage in similar kinds of behavior quite readily. So there's a lot of paradoxes involved in this, a significant amount of hypocrisy, and a lot of double standards. This is indisputable. Like I said, I don't know why people don't just rise up and take these people out. They're nothing more than glorified criminals. Yet this occurs all the time. And many people will actually endorse or promote this, tacitly or otherwise. So it's quite a phenomenon that has existed throughout human history. Obviously, in many cases, these people use force as a means of gaining and maintaining power, and often they will use incredibly brutal methods to repress people and populations. Nonetheless, the actual population vastly outnumbers these people and their inner cohort and sycophants. So technically, it's still hard to imagine how they get away with these kinds of things. But they do. Why would other people support these kinds of people and the movements which they represent? Well, sometimes one group wants to be the in-group or the dominant group, and they will use force or power to repress or even destroy other groups based on ethnicity, religion, race, creed, or so on. That's entirely unacceptable, but at least it's somewhat rational in an evil way. There are a lot of people who get off on making other people suffer, even though wherever these kinds of things occur, wherever we have dictators and tyrants, generally everybody suffers. There's something really primally twisted going on there. And some people actually think, believe it or not, that some people are more inherently worthy than others, and that there should be some kind of hierarchical pecking order with certain people at the top and other people beneath them. Yes, I know that whole notion is completely ridiculous and absurd, but a lot of people actually believe that. It's kind of like monarchists, people who believe that there should be a monarchy. Personally, I think that's kind of a weird fetish, actually, because it makes no logical sense, and why should only a handful of people, by birth or bloodline or whatever, be any different than anyone else? It's completely absurd. Let's face it, those who are overly prone or likely to submit to authority figures, particularly those who don't warrant such subservience, or those who are unconsciously submissive to some form of tribalistic behavior or peer pressure, are probably grappling with some fairly serious self-worth issues or self-identity issues. Of course, there are others who will support tyrannical regimes or movements out of self-interest. they think that they will somehow benefit from this personally. So their attitude is kind of like, I don't give a crap about everybody else, screw them. They're just worried about their own needs. And obviously, there's a great deal of narcissism involved in that kind of thinking. In other words, I don't give a crap about anyone else but myself and how I'm going to benefit from this personally. They are perfectly willing, in other words, to sacrifice everyone else's best interests for their own temporary self-gratification. Again, to varying degrees, this is a form of malignant narcissism. And there are a lot of people who are just into tribalism and sycophancy. Like, for example, when the debate was raging about whether Biden should step down, I saw a lot of people lamenting that anyone would even question his senility, even though it was blatantly obvious to everyone that he was having problems related to aging, which happens to everybody. And there were a lot of tribalistic kind of expressions to support him, even though clearly he was flawed. And who isn't flawed, let's be clear. And quite ironically as well, there were even plenty of conspiracy theories flying around about how the whole thing was a fabrication of the media, which is, of course, what we have long accused the right wing of doing on a regular, consistent basis. And here we found this occurring on the left side of the political spectrum. I guess conspiracies are deployed whenever it's convenient. So we don't find hypocrisy just on the right side of the political spectrum, obviously. Nonetheless, that kind of tribalism really annoys me. This deep partisanship, where it's almost like a team sport, where it's my team versus your team. The only team I'm interested in is the team with the best ideas, the ones with the right ideas. I could care less about what they're called or what their color is or anything like that. I believe my perspective is much more rational than that. And God forbid, if I ever felt myself becoming sycophantic, I would want to puke. What we want are the best solutions, the best people, the best managers, the best people who can implement things, and so on. And everyone makes mistakes, so there has to be some tolerance and room for people to make mistakes, some latitude, in other words. But if somebody is failing or consistently flawed, they should be replaced by somebody who can do a better job. It just makes common sense. Furthermore, I had some pretty serious disagreements with the Biden administration, particularly around policies having to do with the Middle East, as did many, many others. And of course, that turned off many younger, more progressive voters, which are a critical and essential component of the Democratic base going into a tightly contested election. It seemed almost nihilistic, but there was a lot of denial about that too. We now have a significantly more invigorated candidate on our hands who appeals to women, people of color, the youth, people who are seriously concerned about the Supreme Court, justice, and so on. In fact, the best possible outcome for the November American election would be for the United States to elect a woman president of color because it would drive the right wing absolutely crazy, and we would all deeply relish and enjoy the schadenfreude of that experience. And I look forward to that very, very much. It will effectively rub in their faces everything that they have done wrong over the past 8 or 10 years or so. What could be a better outcome than that? Perfection. Kamala Harris would be the icing on the cake, if not the cherry on top. Bravo. But remember, before Biden stepped down, there was a huge amount of angst about whether we should even be questioning his senility. It's just weird and bizarre. You're talking about the leader of the most powerful country in the world, You cannot have somebody who can barely speak or maintain a thought or remember important details running a country that has the capability of destroying the entire planet like 100 times over. Give me a break. So drop the tribalistic sycophancy. It's quite pathetic and annoying. Anyway, that's behind us. That's good. But this whole thing about allegiance and loyalty exceeding the boundaries of reason and evidence, unquestioning and unthinking deferral, is clearly a concern. And it relates to this topic of tyrants and dictators. My whole point is that we would not have tyrants and dictators if people didn't endorse it, tacitly or otherwise, or put up with it, period. Someone like Vladimir Putin would never exist. So clearly there is something in the human collective consciousness that is wired to these really perverted and twisted ways of expressing power. And until that is cleared or resolved or healed, these really freakish situations will continue to occur. It's part of our collective consciousness, and we need to purge it and grow up and stop acting like we're adolescents and just not put up with this kind of crap anymore. It's really that simple. Our political systems are flawed in the sense that they allow people who are grossly unqualified to be in positions of power, to attain positions of power, and then to exploit the levers of power for their own personal gain. We need radical changes to the way our systems work so that that simply can never happen. And don't get me wrong, I'm not against leadership per se, as long as it's effective, responsible, and accountable. Sometimes we do need people calling the shots, but they shouldn't be criminal or delusional, and they should be competent and, like I said, accountable. Of course, there's also a segment of society that are merely apathetic and complacent. Lazy, in other words. They're too lazy to pay attention or to care, even though what happens politically can radically alter their lives, if not destroy them. So again, it's irrational, and you'll still find many people in the spiritual community who say, oh, it's too much of a bother, or it's too disturbing to pay attention to things like division, even when we're faced with significant numbers of people who wish to impose some kind of dystopic, horrific form of fascistic or barbaric theocratic governance on millions of people against their will. People will argue that, well, it's too much of a downer, so just don't pay attention to what these people are doing or what they intend to do. What we're talking about here, like I said, it's a combination of laziness and magical thinking, as if somehow everything will just resolve itself if we stop paying attention to it. I guess it's like the ostrich sticking its head in the sand. And like I said, yeah, there's lots of people in the spiritual community who will take and promote that position bafflingly. That's not to suggest that we need to be constantly wired to every single development politically, but we certainly need to be engaged, and at the very least we need to vote, and to vote you need to be informed, right? If you're not informed or you're misinformed, you're not acting responsibly. It's irresponsible to not be informed, in other words. My main point is that these kinds of situations can occur because human consciousness permits it. Honestly, there is no excuse for people like Orban, Putin, and the like. None. They could be removed very easily and very quickly if there was a real will to do so. There's no way you can hide from millions of people. Come on. So that's my point, is that our collective consciousness is a bit twisted and perverted, and it needs to change. And until it does, we will have to continue putting up with these kinds of morons and clowns who simply shouldn't exist or be in positions of power. For more detail, Check the episode description for other episodes or articles that are related or that I mentioned. And if you're interested in a reading with me, I'll put a link to that as well. I have a 15% off special on currently. Many sincere thanks to everyone who supports me, especially my YouTube members. Thank you very much. Take care, all the best, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye for now.